then the 2015 Franklin Delano Roosevelt carrier event. The Navy was caught with its pants down. What the Navy confirmed was that they didn't authorize the release of those films, but they don't. The DoD doesn't need their authorization. The DoD can release whatever it wants, and it chose to do so without their authorization. That's very significant. But most importantly, the Navy had a tough position because it was obvious that they'd been sitting on these events, in the case of the Nimitz event, for 13 years, said nothing, done nothing, probably tried to keep the people silent. It's a big PR black eye for them, and so they had to start reacting, and they've done well. First, they changed the protocols by which pilots can report sightings, right? That was kind of internal, but it got released. Then they actually formally came out and said they want their pilots to report this. That got a lot of good press for them. And now the piece de resistance. They basically said these videos are the real deal. Because
which I think, Steve, most of us knew anyway, but they're not saying these are genuine UFOs, whatever they may be, are they? They're just saying the videos are genuine.
They're saying they're confirming that this is gun camera footage from Navy high-tech planes of the event as described. They're not making a statement as to what that is being seen. They're not going to want to do that. And they have also put some distance between them and to the Stars people by saying, look, we didn't authorize it. That's sort of keep nice with some people that would probably be very unhappy if they thought the Navy had authorized.
But tacitly, this statement is a confirmation of what we have seen here, and what these videos depict is weird, is beyond what we know.
Look, Howard, we're walking toward disclosure. I mean, we're in the final months, very possibly.
The final months, you think?
3, 4. Yeah. The developments are coming fast and quickly. Fast and furious, but we have a political drama here that may slow things down a little bit. But this is just the beginning, Howard. Expect more.
And do you think we'll get more videos like this one, perhaps before the end of this year? Certainly, when I speak with Leslie Kane, who was behind the original story in the newspaper, she hints that there may well be more. What do you think?
Elizondo said there's more, and indicated they intend to release more. And they probably would have by now, but the political situation here, and I think you all know about tough political situations, became so messed up that they kind of slow-walked it, I think. They're just kind of taking their time trying to see what's going to happen on the Hill and what's going to happen with the president and so forth. But they are taking meetings on the Hill. They've been meeting for over a year. So we're primed and ready for something big to happen on this issue, but I think it won't break in full until the situation with our president has been resolved.
But who would have thought, say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when you and I first started speaking, that we'd be here now?
Yeah. Hey, it took 23 years since I entered the field to get the gun camera footage out, right? That's all. So clearly they're not rushing it. But this is not uncommon in political activism. You pound away for decades and decades, and then as you approach the prize, things speed up really, really fast. And before you know it, boom, you're...
Well, we'll have to check in with you again soon, I think, Steve. Thank you for doing this. One quick question. What do you make of what's been going on down at Area 51? This Storm Area 51 event, the festival, whatever you want to call it. Far fewer people than was being anticipated on social media have actually turned up. Has it achieved anything?
Thank God. Look, no harm, no foul. About 100 people actually went out to the gate, mostly wearing costumes and having some signs. I think they had fun. I think the guards probably enjoyed it very much. A couple thousand people turned up at Rachel, Nevada, but Rachel had canceled the events there, and that could have gotten out of hand, but it didn't. They should have sent them over to Heiko, which had more things planned. So, but that's the kind of confusion you expect on this kind of toss-it-together salad. But there was no violence, no problems. I'm not aware there was an arrest. There was, however, and this was a pretty slick move on the part of Matty Roberts. He teamed up with a couple of people, and they put on an event in Vegas. Essentially, come to Vegas instead of going out in the middle of the desert.
Matty Roberts is the young guy who came up with this idea in the first place.
Exactly. The young kid that came up with what was a joke, but then it caught fire. And I've heard 10,000 people showed up for that. But so here's my take. Look, I'd oppose this. I said, look, take that down, Maddie. Don't put that up. You don't know what you're getting into. And fine. He was warned a lot, but it worked out. And so the biggest take from this is non-trivial, and that is this. A young kid put up a kind of a cool meme about the ET issue connected to Area 51. And very quickly, up to 3 million people either signed to go or indicated they were interested. Now, most of that they were in on the joke, but they were trying to, how would you say, it was easy to do. It's just a Facebook thing, right? You don't have to give your email. It was their way of saying, hey, we want the truth here. We want disclosure. So this is a nice test of the public sentiment. And in that sense, Maddie has made a nice contribution.
That's, I think, undeniably a fact. Very, very quickly, David Goldfein, or Goldfein, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force, according to reports that I'm seeing here, told reporters, coincident with the Area 51 thing, that the U.S. has, quotes, many secrets that it needs to protect from external threats. And a lot of people are reading an awful lot into what this man said. What do you say?
It's interesting he said it at all, because everybody knows America has all kinds of secrets related to potential threats. So the fact that he said it at all is probably being queried about this. Yeah, the Air Force and the other services obviously are feeling the pressure. They don't know what's going to happen next. And that was a simple way to kind of fend off a question, meaning, look, I can't talk about this. We're talking major secrets and national security and so forth. And that's part of the dynamic. The people want the truth. The military wants max secrecy in order to protect us. And we're going to find a balance between these two. And in the middle of that balance will be the disclosure or the confirmation event of the ET presence.
Steve Bassett, thank you for making time for me again.
My pleasure as always, Howard.
Steve Bassett, always our pleasure to speak with him. We spoke with him a couple of minutes before we came on air here, just for logistical reasons, as they say. Steve Bassett, of course, one of the world's leading campaigners for disclosure, and saying, and arguably he has a very good point here, that we seem to be edging closer to something. I suppose, as ever on this show, we ask the question what that might be. Could it be disclosure? Could it be more information? Might we finally get to discover what a lot of us have suspected, if I can say, for a very long time, that in this universe we're not alone, and that we've been visited by craft that are not of our origin, but whose origin are they of, if you see what I'm saying? It seems incredible to be saying words like that on a radio station, on a legitimate, show. But that is where we seem to be at, unless, of course, you know different. Just a couple of other news stories here. Oh, by the way, next hour, by the look of it, Jeremy Corbell, live at Area 51, where they've been having this Storm Area 51 event, and not nearly as many people as they said might turn up have actually turned up. What does it mean? Who's there right now? What's it been like? And, atmosphere, all that kind of stuff. We'll get it from Jeremy Corbell, independent filmmaker, the man who knows Bob Lazar, the man who told the world, don't forget that he worked at Area 51. Jeremy Corbell made a film about him as a friend of his. He's at Area 51, and probably an hour-ish from now, if it all comes together, I hope it does, we'll talk to Jeremy Corbell direct from the gates, very close, of Area 51. A couple of other news stories, then we'll take some commercials here. Daily Express this week. Former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik, remember him, has claimed human life may have originated from space. Speaking on Good Morning Britain this week, with host Kate Garraway, and this piece, for some reason I don't understand, gives the ages of Kate Garraway and Ben Shepherd, which I don't think is necessary, really. But they know best. Mr. Opik revealed who he believes human DNA could have come from another planet. Mr. Opik told that's a typing error by the Daily Express, by the way. Why he believed, I think, is the proper phrase. Mr. Opik told the presenters, it could be us. We could be the aliens, and the reason I say that is before nothing their astounding demeanors. The former politician continued, because the universe is about 14 billion years old, and it's quite possible life has been seeded from one place to another, either by accident, by asteroids bringing organic material here, or on purpose, which is a fascinating thought. Daily Mail carries a survey this week. Men are more enthusiastic about speaking to aliens than are women, apparently. My email inbox does not indicate that. It's about 50-50, but, there's a survey here. The researchers from Oxford University announced at the British Science Festival hosted by the University of Warwick, the data said that 55% of men want to reach out to extraterrestrials compared to just 47% of women. 11% of those polled by Survation even said they would want a global referendum on the matter. Are you sure with those numbers? I'll leave you with that thought. From Huffington Post this week, very quickly. Internal emails from NASA reveal, according to the Huffington Post and some other organs of news this week, reveal how experts didn't detect a football field-sized asteroid until it was about to narrowly miss Earth this summer. In emails obtained by BuzzFeed via a Freedom of Information Act request, NASA officials asked each other how the asteroid called 2019 OK had escaped detection until an observatory in Brazil reported it on the 24th of July, the same day that it passed our planet. In the email chain, Paul Chodas, manager of NASA's Center for Near-Earth Object Studies, posed two questions. First, why was 2019 OK not discovered by one of the major NASA surveys? And second, if the Brazilian observatory hadn't caught the asteroid, is it possible it could have escaped discovery completely? That is pretty scary. When you understand the fact as we do, because, we know about these things, that's why we're listening to this show, that we're a cosmic shooting gallery and things from space are shooting past this planet all the time and we're discovering more. So if we miss something big, which apparently may have happened here, that's a bit of an issue, isn't it? Daily Star this week as we continue the news hour on The Unexplained. A psychic medium claims that she can slip back through time, just like Kylie Minogue. Remember, she had stepped back in times ahead, and see forgotten buildings and secret tunnels that haven't existed for hundreds of years. Erin Venn from Stroud, Gloucestershire, says she has a unique ability to see the past and regularly has visions of buildings that don't exist anymore. The psychic, who is Spiritualist National Union accredited, according to the Daily Star, worked with staff at the 15th century Sudeley Castle in Winchcombe to find out more about the building's history. During a series of visits, Erin, says the paper, explored different parts of the castle, like the Victorian kitchen, where she thought she sensed a network of tunnels and was able to help astonished staff to make a map of them. Erin Venn, had to have her on here, is live to us now. Erin, thank you for staying up on a Sunday night to do this with us.
You're welcome, thank you.
When you say you can step back in time, how do you do it?
It's more a case of I can feel through it rather than, I wouldn't say step back into it. It's more a case of I can see imagery or I can get information on something that used to be there but isn't there anymore, or if the fabric of the building has changed in some way.
Okay, so this is not what we would refer to, some of us will refer to as time slips, where people actually go to a place and they find themselves transported back in time.
No, I don't go anywhere. It's like the building around me is as you would see it, and then for a moment it appears different, or there'll be a doorway in a different place, or I'll just have a sense or a feeling that something's not right, and I'll sort of quest around to see if I can find out what that is.
Wow.
But it's one of those things that I just do it. I can't really explain how.
Have you always been able to do this, or is it something recent?
No, I've never known any different, to be honest. It's always been with me, just like, people that are no longer here. I can, for some reason, see them and communicate with them.
So talk to me, it's a great ability to have, if you have it. That sounds incredible. Talk to me about some of the places that you've been to, and you suddenly sort of blinked and you found yourself in the 1950s or something.
Gosh, there's so many, that's the trouble. And it's because it's not something that I take a huge amount of note of. It happens, it's done, and then it's gone. So mostly in old buildings, I will have a sense of 1 minute I'll be there and the next minute things have changed around me. So, and I've visited many, many castles over the years. So it tends to be more in older properties, to be honest with you, than new builds.
Right, okay, there's an amazing place my mum and dad used to take me, and my listeners in Liverpool and North Wales will know Gurrick Castle in North Wales, which I think was like a cross between a castle and at one time a stately home. And I always used to get a sense of, I'd love to know what went on here when they had great banquets and stuff like that. Can you do those things?
To be honest with you, I'd have to say the whole thing in itself is experimental. It's not something I can do it, but I can't guarantee it. and it's not so easy on and offable as maybe communicating with somebody who's no longer there. So it's one notch harder, if you see what I mean.
And when you're in a different time, or you're seeing a different time, are you able to interact with it?
The people within it, yes, but the actual fabric of the building, no.
Okay, so you've actually been able to speak to people in a different time?
Yes, but I would deem that to be a sense of mediumship.
Okay, and what sort of things do they say? You know, things like get off the grass. Stuff like that. It's just a thought.
No, it's more a case of I kind of trying to give you an example. I was in a castle and I'd taken my son, who was very young at the time. He was absorbed looking at a ship in a glass case. And I saw a lady there in the clothes, you know, the old clothes. And I thought, oh, wow, you know, I didn't realise they had people dressing up here. This is fantastic. But she looked really unhappy and not particularly pleased. So I said to her, oh, are you just enjoying the view? Because she was looking out the window. And she just turned to me and said, yes, I am. And then I went back to sort of say to her, you know, I sort of checked my son and just looked round at him, looked back to her to say, you really don't like this job, do you? And she was no longer there. So she was gone.
Right, so it's almost like, you know, some of us, if we're very lucky, have what we think might be a ghost experience, but you have the full-on experience of the environment in which the ghost might be.
Yes, and that's, I would say, more's the point. I wouldn't call it a time slip. That wouldn't be the phraseology that I'd use.
So that's the newspaper, you know, flamming it up for that. So you went to this castle at Sudeley Castle in Winchcombe.
Yeah.
And you were able to map some tunnels that don't even exist anymore. Is that right?
Well, the interesting thing with Sudeley is I'd actually contacted them about the potential of hiring the facilities there to you know, for a show that I wanted to film. And when I was speaking with them about what I did, they asked me if I would please go around and do a walk around just for the sake of interest. And that walk around turned into a number of walk arounds, and they would literally follow me around and record everything that I was saying. And then they went back and sort of looked through their records and what they could verify. And what I found most interesting with that is the fact that the information that I gave was not in the public domain. So there's no way I could have known those things. Even a researcher couldn't have found those things. It was held in you know, a private, contained area. So they had to go looking through to find that information.
So you were telling them things that only a sealed record that you haven't seen had recorded?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
They must have been pretty impressed with you then.
Well, I think that's why they asked if I could do some tours for them.
And just quickly, these tunnels, which the newspaper gets very excited about here, any idea what they would have been used for?
It seems to be more of a route of an ability to leave, being unseen,
Right.
to be honest.
Oh, God, there are days here when I wish I had one of those. Erin Venn, thank you very much indeed. You have a website. It's only fair that we publicise it.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's erinvenmedium.co.uk. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Erin Venn. Erin Venn in Gloucestershire, who says that she can go to places not every time. It happens a bit randomly, and actually experience a vision of what it is like to be there, and actually, crucially, communicate with those people who may have inhabited that place, which, you know, if that is so, is pretty damn cool, don't you think? More of the news of this week, big cat news. Thank you to Jonathan and to Paul for reporting this to me. The BBC carried this story, and others. A young black panther found prowling the roofs of a northern French town has been captured by emergency services. People were wondering what it was. Astonished residents in Armentières, near Lille, gazed at the powerful feline walking along a second-floor ledge and going in and out of an open window for nearly an hour on Wednesday. Police made a cordon in case it jumped, while rescuers entered the building calmly so as not to shock the cat. A vet was then able to tranquilize it with a dart. Just imagine if you saw that. And some people have, of course, in this country. There's a story about a guy in Cornwall earlier this year, made all the newspapers, quite a few of them, who looked out of his kitchen window and came face to face with a big cat. There seems to be more of this stuff going on. Daily Record this week in Scotland has this story. 5 places in Scotland have been named as some of the most haunted in the UK, from castles to graveyards. The locations are well known for their paranormal activity, but are visited by hundreds of people every month without any fear. The list includes Edinburgh's Vaults and Greyfriars Kirkyard and Birkwood Castle in, I'm going to mispronounce this terribly, but the guest we're about to have on will tell me, in Lesmachal, and Balgony Castle in Glenrothes. At least I get those right, I think. And Glamis Castle. But let's get to talk about this. To expert on paranormal activity, an investigator in these things, Tricia Robertson, author of books including Things You Can Do When You're Dead. Tricia, how are you?
I'm very well, Howard. Nice to talk to you.
This research by the website Higgy Pop that made the Daily Record this week, and probably other papers as well, is this telling us that Scotland is a particularly paranormally blessed or cursed place?
Well, I'm not so sure about that, but you always find it's always old castles and places where things of great emotion have taken place that have this residue that's called a haunt. It all depends, of course, what you mean by a haunting.
Well, what do you mean by a haunting?
Well, what do people mean by a haunting? There's different kinds of haunting. You get haunted places, you can get haunted people. The type of haunt that it's talking about in the Daily Record, which I have actually been down the Edinburgh vaults, and of course the very fact that you're going down into vaults with very slippy stairways and cobblestones and earth. And remember, the Edinburgh vaults are underneath what used to be called the Plague Town. There was a plague in Edinburgh, and the vaults, and they built on top of the vaults where everybody died with the plague. So it's not surprising that there's a lot of negative sort of residue there.
And an awful lot of people, Tricia, who go there report feeling something, seeing something.
A lot of the guide that I saw said that there's a particular place, I can't remember which chamber it is, where Japanese foreign tourists of all kinds say, and who's the little girl in the corner? And she is one that people see all the time, and it's obviously a child that's died with the plague when the plague was actually there. Now, that doesn't mean to say that the actual energy, the spirit, the personality of the child is there. It means there's some kind of imprint left in the building. They call it the stone tape theory. It doesn't mean the child's stuck there forever. It just means the memory of what happened there seems to be imprinted in the stone, imprinted in the place and time.
And yet, some of these presences in Edinburgh, I've heard stories, very credible ones, of people who say that whatever it is interacting with them, is aware of them.
Well, I have never seen that. I've never heard it. That's a different thing entirely. If we're talking about haunting as something from somebody that's actually died, there's different kinds of haunting. There's what I call the stone tape scene, what people might call the residue of what happened there, a very emotional time, in which they do not interact. But you can perhaps get a haunting when people have died and not moved over. That's not nearly as common as the haunting when something awful has happened there. It's always something negative, by the way. You never get a haunting where there's been something wonderful happened in the particular place. But just as I've explained to you before about the airmen that were stuck on the airplane for 30 years, they could be said to be haunting a place, but they're not really. They're just stuck there, and sometimes they don't interact either. But there are other people who are stuck on the airplane that haven't quite moved over, who do or can interact. So you've got at least 3 different types of what you might call a haunting. But the ones in the paper were definitely residues. It's like a video in space and time of what happened there before, and that's what people are seeing. I've never heard of any of the Edinburgh ones been interacting. Someone may prove me wrong. That's wonderful.
Well, Elaine Kelly from Spectre Detectors was warned off by something there. So you'll have to talk to her about that one. She's been on the show. Now, castles also make the list, and there are plenty of those in Scotland. There are a couple. Birkwood Castle, in a place that I daren't even try to pronounce because I think I'll get it wrong again, so I'm not going to do it again. Birkwood Castle and Balgony Castle. What's the name of that?
Lesmahago, is that what you're trying to say?
It's Lesmahago, thank you.
That's it, yeah.
Okay, there's Birkwood Castle and Balgony Castle in a place I can pronounce, Glenrothes.
That's correct.
What about them? What sorts of things appear there, as far as you know?
Well, I really don't know. I don't have. It's not the kind of area I'm particularly interested in. I just know that you always get these things in very, very old buildings or places where something, like battlefields, for example, something where something negative has happened in the past. You've heard about the man with his head tucked underneath his arm as he walked the bloody tower. It's because he had his head chopped off. That memory is still there, and you can see that stone tape city coming through the space and time. It's not as exciting as it actually sounds, that type of thing. It's just something that some people are able to see and others are not. And I'm one of the ones who don't see things, which is quite good for me.
You've been investigating this stuff for, I think, more than 30 years, haven't you?
Yes, but not particularly hauntings. It's life after death as such that I investigate, really.
In all the stuff that you've done, and I've probably asked you this before, but it's always worth asking again, has anything scared you, really scared you?
No.
Which I think probably says more about you than the phenomenon. You are indomitable. Tricia Robertson, thank you. What are you working on at the moment? Any books coming out?
Yeah, just finishing off yet another final edit of this book, which I hope will be out by Christmas. And when that's finished, I'm hoping to do some work with the Windbridge Institute. Well, I am doing work with them in America, working on more experiments to try and top up mediumship experiments to see how good they are.
Well, we'll have to be talking about that. And thank you very much for staying up to do this. Thank you, Tricia.
Not at all.
Tricia Robertson, author of books, including one that's about to come out around Christmas, which we're bound to talk about here, and also things that you can do when you're dead, and more things that you can do when you're dead. Just a couple of other stories, and then we get to more commercials here now. They keep coming. Big and building story in America this week. This from CBS News. New Jersey health officials say 2 new cases of a deadly mosquito-borne virus have been diagnosed in the state. There are now 3 confirmed human cases of Eastern equine encephalitis in New Jersey. The first case was found back in August. EEE is rare and serious, transmitted to humans by a mosquito bite, and has already killed at least 3 people in America this year. So far, this year's deaths have been reported in Michigan, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Health officials add that there's no human vaccine for this, making it even more dangerous. This is a story that's very big in America, and so far hasn't, I don't think, been reported here. This was reported here and kind of ties into that story. This was in The Sun this week. Genetically modified mosquitoes that were designed by scientists. And, you will have probably read about this. It was all over all of the main papers saying, if, you go abroad, you're not going to be bugged by mosquitoes. And if you go to Africa, you may not have to risk malaria quite in the same way again. According to this story, and it's in a number of papers, including The Sun this week, genetically modified mosquitoes that were designed by scientists to help populations decrease are actually thriving now. According to new research, it claims the plan to create gene-hacked mosquitoes that have offspring that die immediately has spectacularly backfired, and now scientists don't know what's going to happen next. In other words, they claim to genetically seed and change these mosquitoes, and they've been coming back. They were affected for a while, and then they started coming back even stronger and more resistant, which says a lot about nature, doesn't it? But it's pretty damn worrying, I would say. From Forbes.com this week, more on this story. It's big, long, black, and was spotted slithering through the waters of China's Yangtze River near the massive Three Gorges Dam. Doesn't appear to be related to the Loch Ness Monster. Last week, the world was captivated by videos and pictures of what looked like the Loch Ness Monster, but at the Yangtze River. Okay, made famous by Monty Python. If you're of a certain age, you may remember. Now, apparently, it's been solved, and they say it was a piece of rubber from a ship, perhaps, or China TV alternatively says the slithering object was actually a mesh sunshade. You try saying that at this time of night. From the ferry terminal where the video was shot, the report says an employee at the terminal shared the video with friends as a joke, which just goes to prove that there's nothing really much that can surprise you in this world, and sometimes those things that you think may well be pure paranormality or really weird have a perfectly good explanation. But as long as a lot of them don't, we continue to do this show called The Unexplained. More of the news, though. Tech news, BBC says this week. Facebook. The rest of the media says this too, says that it suspended tens of thousands of apps as part of an investigation it launched in the wake of the Cambridge Analytica data harvesting scandal that you will remember. The suspended apps were associated with around 400 developers, it said. Facebook said not all the apps posed a threat to users, thankfully. The company came under huge pressure in 2018 after it was revealed that Cambridge Analytica had accessed many users' data without their permission. The political consultancy firm is alleged to have used this data harvested by a personality quiz to target political advertising. So here we have a bunch of apps, well, tens of thousands of them to be exact, associated with 400 developers. They've been suspended as part of an ongoing investigation. What are we to make of this? The man who follows Facebook assiduously is Fevzi Turkalp, the gadget detective. He's online to us now here at Talk Radio. Fevzi, thank you for doing this. What is Facebook up to?
So Facebook is trying to root out the apps that are misbehaving, and that misbehavior can take a number of different forms. So it could be that these apps that are running on the Facebook platform that Facebook users are filling in, quizzes, questionnaires, games, that sort of thing, they're scraping information off the Facebook system about users and the contacts of users. So one of the things they may be doing is scraping information that they're not permitted to get. Another thing is, how are they sharing that information? Are they sharing it with others? If they are sharing it with others, is it appropriate that they do so? And are they anonymizing the data? In other words, you can provide the data in an anonymous form. Although I have to say, anonymized data is not usually anonymous. It can be unanonymous or disanonymized. So that's on the face of it what they're doing. And that's continuing. So although it's 400 developers now and tens of thousands of apps, that's an ongoing process. So I guess, what does it tell us? It tells us that, you really need to be careful about the apps that you use on Facebook, because you can bet your boots there are a very large number more that are still doing things that they shouldn't be doing.
But then we know, because of the many conversations that you and I have had over the years, and we've had many of them, that you always have to be careful on these platforms. So that's not news in itself, is it? But Facebook seem to be doing something about this now. For what reason, do you think?
Yeah, well, Facebook finds itself under increasing scrutiny in the US, in the UK, and the European Union, and elsewhere. In some places, they're threatening to break Facebook up into its constituent parts. WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook may be split into separate companies, or they may bring in new taxes to pay for regulators and so forth. So they're trying to be seen to be taking steps about this. Unfortunately, Facebook does seem to have a history of arguably worrying more about the optics of criticism than solving the criticism itself. So, they've hired consultants and so forth, and a number of those people in the past have quit, saying that Facebook isn't really serious about fixing the things that it's been criticised of. Facebook will, by the observation of many, do what it thinks it needs to be seen to be doing at key points when they're about to get regulated. So I think that's that. The other thing I'd say about this, Howard, is that none of this speaks to what Facebook does itself with the data. Okay, it's kind of deflecting attention by saying, oh yeah, it's these rogue apps. Well, first of all, tens of thousands of apps means, in my view, that Facebook's failing in policing what those apps are and how they operate in the first place. It's all very well doing a review after the fact, but they should be preventing this. But none of this speaks to what they're doing. And so those concerns about what Facebook does with our data, that's the main concern.
So do you think this calls, very quickly, for more regulation? Yeah. Or is the regulation we've got up to snuff?
Well, I'd liken it like this. At the moment, we seem to be in the position of asking a tobacco company to regulate the safety of its own products. I would really like to see them externally regulated and make sure that people understand what they're getting into when they use Facebook's in quote free product.
Fevzi, thank you very much for that. Fevzi Turkalp, great friend of this show, great friend of mine, and explaining why this is happening and what it may mean. I think we need to be watching this and what happens to those 400 developers associated with those suspended apps. Okay, let's get to this quickly. For the past 3 months, Riley Horner, a teenager from Illinois, has been waking up every morning thinking it's June the 11th, and to make matters worse, her memory resets itself every couple of hours. Your heart goes out to her, but what a story. Listen to this report from American TV.
I'm very confused, and I try to think back, and I can't. Every 2 hours, her memory resets, and each morning, she wakes up scared and confused.
And then I have a calendar on my door, and I look, and it's September, and I'm like, oh, whoa.
When she wakes up in the morning, she thinks it's June 11th.
That's the day Riley was accidentally kicked in the head. And after dozens of seizures and countless hospital visits, the Horners still don't know why Riley can't remember anything.
They tell us, like, there's nothing medically wrong. Like, they can't see anything medically. You can't see a concussion, though, on an MRI or a CT scan. My brother passed away last week, and she probably has no idea. And we tell her every day, but she doesn't have no idea about it.
Even the simpler things are wiped out. At school, Riley can't even remember where her locker is.
I know it's hard for them as much as it's hard for me, and like people just don't understand. It's like a movie. I will have no recollection of this in supper time.
It's changed everything for the former athlete and scholar.
And they told us that she may just be like this forever, and I'm not okay with that.
For a girl who should be in the most memorable time of her life.
I'm not making memories, and I'm just really scared.
A report from one of ABC's affiliate TV stations in the U.S. This girl is called Riley Horner. She's from Illinois, and she wakes up daily thinking it's still June the 11th. It's real kind of Groundhog Day. And the last I read about her, she was going to see some medics who would try and further investigate her and try and understand what on earth is going on in that poor girl's mind to wake up and forget everything, to forget that she'd been filmed and interviewed by that TV station in the U.S., and everything. Tomorrow morning she will wake up unless something is done that helps her radically and believe it's still June the 11th. She is stuck in time. What a story. Every so often you get a medical oddity like that comes up, but that one really touches your heart. Okay, coming up in the next hour here on the Unexplained at Talk Radio, we'll talk about covert military operations. Well, a man who's written about these things and many others to do with covert operations and the kind of people who carry them out is Ralph Pizzullo, best-selling author of books like Jawbreaker, Left of Boom, Most Evil, and other books. We'll be talking with him in just a moment here. We're still trying to connect with him. In fact, the line has kind of dropped slightly, so he's there now. Okay, Ralph Pizzullo, thank you very much for coming on my show.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Ralph, you have a fantastic background for the work that you do as a writer, because you actually, as a child and as a young person, you lived this.
Yes. My parents are both my sons and daughters of Italian immigrants who grew up in the Bronx of New York. When I was 5 years old, my dad was a history teacher, and he took an exam to join the Foreign Service, which is the U.S. diplomatic service. And that kind of set us off on an adventure that took us to Mexico, Vietnam, Colombia, Bolivia, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Uruguay, and Haiti.
But you list those countries quite
yes.
matter-of-factly, but some of those places, of course, were hotspots. Haiti, for example, had a dictator called Papa Doc, and people would be disappeared with remarkable ease there. You were in Vietnam and Colombia, and Nicaragua. What was it like being there?
Well, my father liked to be in hardship posts because it would help advance his career, and he also wanted his family to be with him. So, for example, we were in Vietnam from 63 to 65, which was extremely dangerous time. And most people who were there, diplomats and servicemen, didn't have their families, but my father wanted his family to be there. I was 8, 9, 10 years old, and, being a curious kind of adventurous kid, I was, running around. I ended up working in the embassy shop with local Vietnamese men, doing carpentry and, traveling around the city on the back of a motorbike when bombs were going off, fall asleep at night to the sounds of artillery shells exploding in the distance.
So if you ever saw that movie Good Morning Vietnam, that is exactly the atmosphere that you lived in.
That's correct, yes. At the time, I was a kid, you just sort of go with it, and I love Vietnam. I love the people. It was extremely, exciting time. But, you know, when you look back, you think, you know, what were my parents thinking? I mean, it's crazy. And most of the time, they had no idea where I was or what I was doing. And, but I managed to, you know, make some great friends and survive and witness, like an incredible, you know, moment in history.
As a small child, sometimes children are best placed to do these things. Did you have any connections with, any meetings with, any involvement with people who you may have later discovered were Viet Cong, were the opposition?
It's possible. It's possible. I remember a couple of times where, you know, I would run into people and they would give me like a very, you know, funny look, like, gee, you know, you're not supposed to be here. And if you knew who I really was, I'm sure I ran into Viet Cong. They were everywhere. They were living among the population. You know, probably some of the workmen that I worked with were Viet Cong. But I think, you know, they understood that I was a kid, that I was not a combatant, that I had, you know, no axe to grind with them. In fact, I was, you know, the whole situation seemed strange to me. One of the things I did when I was there, I was a bat boy for the U.S. Special Forces softball team. Really? And these were the guys who were up in the highlands fighting the Montagnards. And, you know, we would play softball on Saturday and afterwards, you know, hang around and have, they would have beer, I would have soft drinks, and they would barbecue hamburgers. And, you know, I was like their mascot, and I would talk to them and they'd go, you know, this is, you know, 63, 64. They'd go, you know, Ralph, this is crazy. There's no way we could ever win this war. This isn't what people think it is. You know, you go 5 miles out of Saigon and the people don't know who the president is. They don't understand, you know, why the Americans are here in the first place.
And yet it took another 12, 13 years for that whole nightmare to come to an end.
Yeah. And it was surreal for me because, you know, when I went to college, that was the early 70s, and, you know, the anti-Vietnam, you know, sentiment in universities was at full swing. And, you know, I was someone who had lived there. And so it was you know, really, you know, strange experience.
But also, you know, mind-broadening one, I'm sure that made you the author, along with the other places you went to that you became. The guys who you were the mascot for, though, I mean, you know, let's not put too fine a point on it. These were the people who were doing infiltrations, incredibly difficult and dangerous work.
Yes.
Did they ever tell you much about that?
They were, you know, for me, they were just, you know, young guys, you know, from 19 to their early 20s. A lot of them were from the South, as is usually the case with the American military. You know, great guys. But, you know, they were, as a lot of people like that are, you know, they're dedicated to their country, and at the same time, you know, they're not stupid, so they see what the situation that they're in, and feel that the people who are making the policy in Washington or at the embassy have no idea what's really going on the ground.
And when you were part of those ball games, were there people who you saw on one ball game and the next time they had a game, they weren't there?
That's correct. Yes. A number of them were killed, and actually the ball field itself was attacked by the Viet Cong and blown up. And I think, I don't know, like 20 people died. Fortunately, I wasn't there that day, but it was near the school, near Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base. And I remember during one break in the school, in the school day, I wandered over there with some friends just to see what the ball field was like. And the dugout where I used to hold, you know, have the bats and the equipment ready for the guys to use was like a crater now. And so that was a very eerie experience.
And you would have been, what, 7 or 8, maybe 9?
I was, probably 9 or 10, yeah.
And did you ever go, I mean, this goes for other postings that you were involved in, including Bolivia and certainly Colombia, Nicaragua. Did you ever go to your dad and say, Dad, what are we doing here?
You know, my father wasn't the kind of person you could asked that question too. I thought of it often. I'm sure I asked him. I have a funny experience. When we first got to Bolivia, we were living in a temporary apartment that sort of had a balcony that overlooked the downtown. It was up on a slope, and there was the miners in Bolivia were demonstrating against the government, and there were these small planes buzzing over the miners, firing and dropping tear gas. And my brother and I were out on the balcony. My brother's younger than I am. We were out on the balcony watching it. And other people in the building called the U.S. Embassy and said, there's these two crazy kids. And they're out on the balcony, like watching these airplanes strafe the demonstrators and, kind of pointing out different kinds of planes and so on, which is what I was doing. And finally somebody came out and said, what the hell is wrong with you kids? Get in here. And I was surprised because, we had just come from Vietnam. So that kind of thing was normal to me.
Boy. And so this was the kind of thing that laid the foundations for the work that you've been doing. Did you, because you've written extensively about covert operations and the sort of people who do covert operations in America, as we know, this country too, all countries have been involved in these things over the years. Did you start as a child to get an appreciation of the kind of people who do these things?
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely right. So, in every embassy overseas, there was the official embassy staff, and then there would be, people who were nominally part of the official embassy staff, but their fathers were in the CIA. And, I played with their kids. I would meet these men, talk to them sometimes, always curious. And so, you develop an appreciation for the kind of people who do this, the mentality, the sacrifices they make, and the kind of work that they do. And so when I was started to being approached later in my life by people like Gary Bernson and Doug Lau and so on, who had been in the CIA and, did amazing operations overseas, I just have a sort of a natural kind of ease with them, and it's easy for them to trust me because they kind of, can tell that I understand, where they're coming from and, some aspects of their experience.
Which has made it possible for you to be able to annotate their stories and get them out to the world, because by the sounds of it, your background means that they will speak to you in a way that they wouldn't speak to me.
Yes. Yeah. A lot of people, it's like anything else. I can speak their language. I understand, a lot of the challenges that they face. The CIA to me is not a scary thing, or a paranoid thing, like, thing to be paranoid about that, for other people. I recently did a book with a former FBI undercover officer, and he told me before he met me he had interviewed something like 8 different writers, and he said immediately he could tell that they felt uncomfortable with him, and as soon as he started speaking to me, he was like, okay, well, this guy gets it. He kind of.
I guess you're having to do this in a non-judgmental way, because we know by reading the newspapers and we know by having some knowledge of history that the CIA has had its fingers in a lot of dirt over the years, and it's been involved in some things that haven't worked for them particularly, and some things that nobody can be really proud of. So I guess when you're talking to people involved in these things, you have to be able to shut that out and get an appreciation of the person.
Well, that's exactly right. I am just focused on the person. I'm focused on the person. I want to understand, why they did what motivates them, what they were involved in, what they think about it. Because one of the things that I learned early in my life through my father is that, the people who implement policy in the field don't necessarily agree with the policy. In fact, a lot of times they disagree with the policy.
Isn't that interesting? And I suppose you learned that in Vietnam, where, you've got to do your job. We've all got to do our job.
That's exactly right. And I could, I remember, my father, telling him about what I heard from, for example, the Special Forces guys that I was their bat boy for the softball team, and him initially telling me, don't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about. And I was the kind of kid who, would go, well, Dad, how can you say they don't know what they're talking about when they're the ones who are out there doing this? And, eventually, I could see him, he would, struggle with that. And eventually my father and a lot of people like him who were, implementing the policy in Vietnam started to question, like, are we doing the right thing? Should we even be here? Are we making the problem worse?
And a lot of conflicted people. We're going to have to take a break, Ralph, but
sure.
You're a best-selling author, we have to tell my audience, playwright and screenwriter, and I think we've been hearing in the last 15 minutes or so why that is. We'll talk about covert operations and the kind of people who undertake those things, some jaw-dropping and hair-curling stories you're about to hear from Ralph. It's one thing to know these people as you did as a child and later in life. It's another thing to write about them. What made you want to write some of these people's stories?
I find them fascinating, and I think other people, find it fascinating. I'm always interested in, in people and human motivations, and especially people who choose to put themselves in extreme circumstances, and and the gentlemen that I work with are, they fit that description, and they're also willing to come forward and talk about it.
And why do you think, we're going to talk in just a second about Gary Berntsen, the former CIA man who was involved in amazing things. What is it about them now that makes them want to talk about these things? Is it one of those things that, if you're involved in something big, maybe it's traumatic, whatever it is, the best therapy is to talk? Is that what motivates them?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is therapeutic. In fact, a number of them, they tell me things that they've never told anybody, or they've never told their wives. And sometimes, it often happens that they tell me, just talking to me and talking about these things is therapeutic. And it also helps them sort of make sense of it, because, I'm looking to find the story. What is it about you, or what did you learn in your prior experience that made you able to do this, or brought you to this point? And I do. They all say that it's therapeutic.
How did you meet Gary Berntsen?
Well, that was interesting. I received an email, I think it was in late 2003 or 2004, and the email basically read, I'm a U.S. intelligence operative, I'm overseas, and I've been looking for somebody to write with, and I've been researching for 6 months, and you're the person that I chose. And I showed it to my wife, and she said, are you going to respond to this? And I said, yeah, I kind of have an idea of, who the type of person this is. I responded, and at the time he was in Bolivia, serving in Bolivia.
A place you knew well.
Yeah, a place I knew well. I'd lived there for 3 years. And we agreed to meet in New York City in a hotel lobby. And it was funny because he didn't give me much. I had very little physical description, and I entered the lobby just as like a bus disgorged, 40 or 60 people, and I just saw this one man just kind of exuding energy, and I walked straight over to him, and he was kind of like, how did you know it was me? Because they kind of, they want to see you first. They're trained to just kind of fit in. And I just walked right over to him and I said, hey, Gary, it's Ralph. And he was like,
you just knew. And of course, that will have blindsided him somewhat, because he has that skill of checking people out. And in the operations that he's been involved in, you have to check people out, because the person that, you're looking at, who can't see you yet, might have a gun.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. He was in the back, sort of at the back of the lobby, and I could see he was kind of like, trying to be inconspicuous. And when I walked right over to him, he was surprised.
Remarkable man, but sorry, you were saying.
Yeah. Well, and then he sat me down. We went to a restaurant. He's a very animated person. He's got a lot of energy. And he sat me down and he told me a whole story about how he was responsible for tracking and taking down the Japanese Red Army, which was a really, ferocious terrorist organization in the 70s, run by a woman, Japanese woman. Really interesting story. And he told me this whole story. It was like it was beyond James Bond or Jason Bourne. Just incredible, tracking these people all over the world, finding the guy who was in second in charge. He was actually hiding in a Buddhist monastery in Kathmandu, posing as a massage therapist. And they arrested him. It was just an amazing story. And he said, this is the book I want to write. And I said, hey, that's fantastic. Let me talk to my literary agent, and we'll get start working on it.
And this is I'm not trying to be flippant about this, but how did you assure yourself? I know you said that he looked and felt, and if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it is a duck. But how did you assure yourself at the beginning that this guy was not shooting you a line?
Well, I could tell. I've been around these kind of people. I really had never had any doubt. I maybe he showed me a idea at some point, but I could just tell from being around it. And just to continue the story, I walked him to the train station, and he said, "Hey, after that book, I was the guy who went into Afghanistan after 9/11 and had bin Laden trapped in Tora Bora. And that'll be the next book we write." And I grabbed him. I actually pulled him off the train, and I was like, "What are you? Tell me the story." And he told me the story, and I said to him then, I said, that's the book we have to write now. And we've kind of wrestled with that for like 3 months, and finally he gave in, and we wrote Jawbreaker.
And Tora Bora, for those who perhaps are too young to remember, it was a name that was imprinted on most of those, people that I know who did news, and I was one of those people. It was a cave complex, wasn't it, where you could, if you knew the terrain, you could easily hide.
Yeah, it's actually like a mountainous, very steep, desolate, mountainous area on the southeast border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And very hard to access. And as you say, bin Laden had used it as kind of a base for years and had built caves. And he actually had like barracks and like a whole kind of camp set up up high in the mountains.
Gary Bernstein is remarkable. If you look at his biography from simply this point, he was with the CIA, Director of Operations, between 82 and June 2005. That's astonishing longevity of 3 decades almost.
Yes. Yeah, he's an amazing guy. He's got a tremendous amount of energy. I would call him like a type AAA personality. How could I explain? Like, he's the guy, if you needed to move like Parliament across the river, the building, and you said, it's got to be done in a year, Gary would find a way to do it. He's just kind of a force of nature. He'll insult a lot of people and make a lot of enemies along the way, but he'll get the job done, and that's the kind of person he is.
Is he a master of disguise? From one of the things you said in our previous segment, it sounds like he is.
I don't know if he's a master of disguise. CIA operations people are trained to just sort of fit into any environment that they're in. And just sort of, wear the clothes and have the haircut, that, they just blend in with, with other people. They don't stand out. And, he certainly fits into that category.
But from what you said...
And he also speaks. Yeah.
Sorry, he speaks...
He also speaks, he's also comfortable, moving around the world, and he speaks, numerous languages.
Now, presumably, to be involved from the very get-go in the hunt for Osama bin Laden, he presumably had to have an excellent knowledge of and ability to speak Arabic?
Yes, he's a people like Gary have a great ability to kind of find the right people to work with. They know how to speak to just people on the street. They're just good at eliciting information, pulling people into their confidence, and really that's what they depend on. They depend on getting information from other people and finding people who are willing to give up information about sensitive topics.
Now, going behind the lines, as it were, in Afghanistan would be dangerous today. It was potentially lethal then. How was the mission presented to him?
Okay, so what happened was after 9/11, the day after 9/11, it became, it became knowledge that it was discovered that the planning for the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon took place in Afghanistan, and that Bin Laden had organized it, and the people around him had been planning this for years. At the time, he was being protected by the Taliban, which was the Islamic regime that was in power in Afghanistan. And the Bush administration immediately sent a message to the Taliban saying, we want you to turn Bin Laden and his group, which was called Al-Qaeda, over to us. And the Taliban responded, we're not going to do that. So there was a meeting of the National Security Council the day after 9/11, and President Bush said, okay, the Taliban has basically told us they're not going to cooperate. We need to go into Afghanistan and get these people. And he turned to Donald Rumsfeld, who was the head of the Pentagon, and said, what can we do? And Donald Rumsfeld said, well, the U.S. military is going to need 6 months to plan an operation because Afghanistan is a landlocked country. The Soviets were there 10 years and they were, they got...
Well, they barely scratched the surface. They were kicked out effectively, weren't they?
They were kicked out, and we don't, so we have to study this. We have to figure out, how we're gonna get into Afghanistan, and this is a complicated mission. And the president, in his frustration, was saying, well, we got to do something now. We can't wait 6 months. And the head of the CIA, George Tenet, raised his hand, and he basically said, we've had some people working in Afghanistan with the Northern Alliance, which was the opposition to the Taliban, that worked within the the Tajik and the Uzbek tribes in northern Afghanistan. And so we've run some operations with them. Maybe we can put a team together and that can, land in the north, work with the Northern Alliance, and at least we can start to prepare things on the ground for the military when the military, gets their act together and can finally launch an operation. And the man that they selected for this mission was Gary Bernson, because Gary had been in Afghanistan a year before on a mission to find Bin Laden and eliminate him after the attack on the USS Cole, which was a destroyer that was docked in Yemen and attacked by Al-Qaeda. He and the people that he was with were pulled out of that was during the Clinton administration, and they were pulled out because the Clinton administration couldn't find a legal means to kill Bin Laden or capture him in Afghanistan. So they pulled these guys out. But Gary had developed a relationship with Shah Massoud, who was the head of the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan. So they called Gary in. Gary at the time was serving in Montevideo, Uruguay. He came up to CIA headquarters, and he started